Go.
Good morning. Good morning, ma'am. This is the report of Group 1. The topic is the Earth's history in geology time. This next slide, please. This topic, the Earth history and geologic time have a two topic. First is principle about sedimentary rock. Then second is type of fossils. Next slide, please. Sedimentary rock. It is a type of rock that formed by the accumulations, depositions of minerals. They are formed by compact each other, so they have meet by the different minerals or particles that found on Earth. Next. It formed when sediment is deposited out of air, ice, when gravity or water flows, carrying the particles and its suspension. So, as you can see, we have a different type of formations of sedimentary rock. The formation of sedimentary rock caused by the wind or the gravity or the flow of water. So, the formation of sedimentary rock depends by the flowing of the air surface of the gravity of the air or the flow of waters by carrying the rain or the gravity, the pushing by the force, pushing underground to the surface of the earth. Next slide. Next is sedimentary accumulates in the positional environment. So older sediments are buried by younger sediments and then undergo diagnosis. These pictures show that the older sediment is buried. Natabunan na siya sa mga katong sa younger sediment na nipuli siya. So in short, the katong tigulang nga na sediment is nasa pinakalalong na surface on the earth. So the younger sediment is on the top that we see sa surface of the earth. So they undergo processing by or sa weather or sa gravity siya 5 billion years ago. Next slide. Often deposited in layers. So as you can see, they have two picture of fossils. So they are nalubong na siya sa kaduri na panahon because as you can see, the sediment is also sedimentary rock is also we found the fossils. So you can see here we have a fossils of dinosaurs that living. So in the ground they have older sediment, then in the top is the younger sediment that we see in present a day. So and the next picture is also the fossils that you can see sedimentary. Next slide, please. And another features of sedimentary rock with the fossils that we found. Next slide, please. And important sources of the natural resources, hindi lang about fossils, tinutukoy or formation ng sedimentary rock. It's also about kung saan natin makikita ang mga natural resources natural resources sa ating daigdig. Kagaya ng oil plantation, then they have water and coal. So, makikita natin sa sedimentary rock ang iba't ibang deposito ng mga minerals na matatagpuan natin sa daigdig. Next. The types of sedimentary rock is reported by Ms. Apan.
Now let's move on to the types of sedimentary rock. These are the following is the classic, organic, and chemical. Next slide. Clastic is being composed of consolidated sediments formed by accumulation of fragments. So these are the fragments. So in other words, it is made of segments. mga is made of sediment. Other, so alam naman natin niya yung sediments. So next slide. Na siya example. It is derived from the pre-existing rocks and transported and separate particles to the pieces of depositions by purely mechanical agents. So, ang kini po mga sediments, it is because also sa weathering and erosions mo na mga gagmay, mga magkasapaw-sapaw sila ba? Mo na yung ginatawag po na clastic. Next slide. Next is the organic. Specific type of sedimentary rock contains significant amounts of the organic carbon. So, in other words, ma-form siya through organic materials. So, example, ana is, next slide. Example is this coal. Kana siya, coal is a very inexpensive and efficient way to generate electricity. So we all know that it is one of the most abundant energy sources that we encounter. So it is very helpful to siya ang coal. And as we can see in sa side niya, kay is a shale or shale or block shale. Mao po na siyang nigpi siya, it is because it is made of a tiny black iron and other particles mo nung nigpis kaayo siya. Next slide. Chemicals form when minerals constituents in solution become supersaturated and inorganically precipitate. So, ang chemicals, it includes na siya minerals. So, ang example, ana kay limestone. Next slide. So, common types is the limestone and rock. So, example na to ang Bohol. We all know is, Bohol is about half of the island is covered of limestone. So, ang Bohol is ang Bohol manggod kay as we can see in that limestone kina siya mga bangag-bangag, di ba? But all cover siya bangag-bangag, so when it kanang once na maglinog siya dali ra siya mahugno kay it is because kanang humok ang limestone dili siya dali ra siya ma hugno ay dali ra siya kanang what call this dali ra siya ma something basta dali siya ma-crack. It is because humok ang iyahang ang iyahang rock is what we call limestone. Next slide. So these are also the examples is the rock salt or what we call sodium chloride kay isa siya sa mga evaporate, so chemicals po na siya. And the other side is the rock, gymnasium, and so on. Next slide, please. Most common include sandstone, limestone, and shale also. Ang example. And next slide. And now, let's move on to the principles. Through careful observation of that the accumulation of sedimentary rocks takes place according to some important geological principles. There is the principle of horizontality, principles of superposition, principles of inclusions, and principles of faunal successions. Next slide. So this is the principle of horizontality. The law of horizontality was first proposed by Danish geological pioneer C. Nicholas Steno in the 17th century. Next slide, please. Principles of horizontality. layers of sediment were originally under the deposited horizontally under the action of gravity. So as we can see in this picture, diriya sa right side, ay diriya sa left side, is because of the presence of the gravity. So, kunyari, example, imagine you were pouring a water into a cup. So, dili man dyan siya pwede mag-ana siya. So, it always flat. So, it is because the presence of the gravity. And that's the principle of horizontality. Next slide, please. So, any rock layers that are now folded and tilted have since been altered by layer outside forces. So, as we can see, sedimentary laid down horizontally, the earth is horizontal siya. And then diriya naman sa kanang sa light niya kanang tilted rocks mo nang paana siya, paliko siya. It is because the forces, or what we call the action of the gravity mo nang ginapush siya, mo na siya nga mo nang diriya siya padulong. Okay, next slide please. Now, let's move on to the principles of superposition. States that the youngest rock is always found on the top and the old rock is in the bottom. So, as we can see that, so understandable naman kaayo ang picture. So, the oldest rock is always not just ubos, and the younger is always at the top. So, ang example ani is, di ba we all know that granite is the oldest rock. So, ang example ani, ang granite is na siya sa, of course, sa pinakaubo. Sunod ang shale, sunod ang sandstone and limestone. So, as we can see, para dali ra siya ma-identify is, ang sandstone is not siya always. That is one siya sa example, the law of superposition, na kana siya nga example, because ang granite is the oldest. So, the farther down you go, the older the rock is going to be. So, next slide. This is the two laws of relative dating. The laws of superposition in sedimentary rock, the older layers of rock are deposited first. So, as we can see in that picture, and newer layers are deposited after the older layers. So, antod sa naging by layer na siya, and then it includes na nadra ang mga fossils na nakadikit na siya. So, later on, madiscuss po na siya nato. So, therefore, newer layers are formed on top of the older layers of rock. And observing an undisturbed layer of rock, you can assume that the older rocks are the bottom and the youngest are at the top. So, nagkatabon ang by layer, so daraan na ito makita nga, the oldest is always at the najud siya sa ubos, and the youngest is at the top. So, next slide, please. Wait lang, balik to sa superposition. This superposition is very, very helpful po din siya sa mga geologists, because they can easily determine the relative ages of sedimentary rock to determine the relative ages of sedimentary rocks. So, geologists, para dali ra nila ma-determine, they are using the radioactive dating to determine the absolute relative ages of rock. So, next slide. The principle of inclusions state that inclusions found in the other rocks or formation must be older than the rock that contained them. So, next slide, dagod para maghatag ta og example. So, as we can see that, kana siya nga itom, dili lang kayo mabasa ang kanang, what we call that, rock. So, bear with me that. So, ang kanang itom is, mauna siya ang mao na siya ang kanang oldest rock, nagisapawan siya sa younger rock. So that's what we call inclusions. Kanang gisapawan siya og kanang younger rock sa ay gisapawan og ang younger sa older, and that older is also a mineral. So that's what we call the principle mo po na siya ang ginatawag na principle of inclusions. So next slide. See, di ba, in mineralogy, and inclusions is any material that is trapped inside a mineral during the formation. So, sorry for what I've said a while ago, kay any material di ay siya. So, any material ang nakabutang sa rock B. And then, according to Hutton's law of inclusions, fragments included in a host rock are older than the host rock itself. So, muna kung gingon ganina, so kapirala silang explanation diri. So, okay, next slide. Next is the principle of faunal succession or the biotic succession. So, mao po na siyang gitawag og biotic. It is because as di ba ang fauna wait lang. Contain fossilized flora and fauna, because we all know this fauna and flora, it is the plants and animals. So why is because ginatawag po siya biotic, it is because it is all the living life forms. So mo po na siya ginatawag po na siya biotic succession. So, and that these fossils succeed each other vertically in a specific, reliable order that can be identified over wide horizontal distances. So, as we can see in these pictures, nga every layer has a fossils nga wala pa na-identify or na-identify na sa mga geologists that kailangan po na nilang nga yes, nga to nga every layer fossils na biskang gagmay pa na siya, gagmay siya nga mga life forms, mga living organisms like mga. So next slide please. Now this will be discussed by Jonathan. Jonathan.
They have correct information. First is bidding, next cross biddings, then graded bidding, and ripples, then the last is mud cracks. Then next slide please. Biddings. Then layers of sedimentary different particles sizes are deposited on top of each other. These bins range from the millimeters to the centimeters thick and can even go to meters of multiple meters thick. So as you can see, the beading is kaning layer by layer siya na nagpatong-patong na they have the old, the new, and the bottom, then the young sediments, as you can see now that as a picture. Next slide please. Next is the cross beading. So cross bead are the group of indicated layers, and the sipping layers are known as cross strata. So as you can see, the picture is they have a cross section. So the first is explained by the katumbay layer. Then the next is the cross beading. They have happening now they cross intersection, no, nagkaroon siya ng banggaan. So ang iba is they upside direction, then the other sediment is downside direction. Next slide. This is the cross beading again. Then the cross beading is not also happening under the ground, the sediment. They have also happening in the upward, like the caused by the wind, the water, no, in the ocean, they are caused by the wind. So as you can see the first picture, no, they have rock that they have formations of rock caused by the wind. So if palagi siyang nadadaanan ng hangin, so ang isang bato talagang malalagas ng unti-unti at magkakaroon ng formation kagaya ng first picture po. Then sa next picture po na pangalawa is they have always no na natatamaan ng wave galing sa dagat. So if they are continue o patuloy siya na natatamaan ng tubig is nagdi-deform po ang isang uri ng bato. So as you can see, they have some formations na may cross beading. Next slide please. Group beading. So they identify strata that grade upward and they have coarser textured plastic sediment at their base to thinner textured materials at the top. So since they identify strata that are graded upward, no, so nagkakaroon siya ng characteristics na na may nagkaroon ng isang uri ng bato na murag ni hulma siya no, sa ilalom sa sediment. We have another form of the structures there between the older rock and the younger rock. So as you can see, we have the middle no na nagpo-formulate no na murag ni gawas siya no na ni forma siya dito with a normal size. Next. This is ripple. So ripple, the current pushing sediment into a pile. So as you can see, the picture is what we call ripple is the pushing each other to the one direction or different directions. If they have pushing in different direction, like they are na ang isang sediment is pushing to the upward, then ang iba naman ay pushing to the downward, they cause collide. So nagkakaroon ng malaking impact or magkakaroon ng crack sa ilalim or magkakaroon ng crack sa ibabaw ng lupa. So as you can see, they are ripples, no? They are pushing by the force of gravity. They are only moving, continuously moving by different direction. So, makikita niya sa formation ng mga bato na nagkakaroon ng wave. So, as you can see, the rock, they have wave because they have something pushing the directions into where they go. No? So, next slide. Next is a mud crack. As you can see, we know that the mud is cracking. So, our sedimentary structures form as muddy sediment dries and contracts. So, mud crack, guys, is about the caused by heat or sa kanang pagtutuyo ng mga lupa, no, gikan siya sa basa nga yuta, then syempre tungod sa kainit nag-evaporate siya, pasaka dito as evaporation ang naitabos. They are continuously dry, no, nahimo siyang ugaso. They cause nag-crack siya. Next slide. Crack formations also occurs in clay losing soils as the result of reductions in water content. So, kasagaran sa mga nag-crack og yuta is katong na abandonahan na siya sa mga tubig pero tungod kay nikalit siya kaugas, they are cracking when murag naugan na siya nga mga something places na murag need siya water tungod sa kainit sa kainit no, especially naghahabo ni siya during El Nino time no, during global warming, so this changes, so nagkakaroon po ng yan. Then mabalik na po siya sa normal if they maulanan or something, mabasa siya. Next slide please. Then the fossil topic is explained in this
Okay, fossils are remains or traces of ancient life that have been preserved by natural process. So as we can see in these pictures, these are the fossils. Kanang na-imprint jud sila, di ba? Understandable na kay siya ang words nga remains or traces. So mo na siya sa mga fossils mas usually nato nakita is sa mga museum. Sa museums nato na sila nakita. It is importante pud kaayo sa tuwa ang fossils today is because it changes over time. So next slide please. Examples are bones, shells, imprints of animals, microbes, exoskeleton objects preserved in amber, petrified wood, coal, hair, oil, and DNA. So these are the examples of the fossils. Okay, next slide please. So it has 5 types of fossils. These are the body fossils, molecular fossils, trace fossils, carbon fossils, and lastly the pseudofossils. Next slide please. So body fossils. The remains of the body parts of ancient animals, plants, and other life forms. So dili jud na siya ginaingon nga kanang the whole part of the, just like dinosaur, dili jud na siya as in tanan kompleto jud na dili basta dili na siya kompleto. There are other parts nga kanang nakita sa mga geologists at that time nga dira sa mga rocks nga nakita nila nga these are the part of the dinosaur. So of course these body fossils is they tell us something about the appearance of ancient life forms. So next slide please. So example ang kini, this is from the display the Dinosaur National Monument. So according siya sa mga geologists ka nakita nila a wall of a large dinosaur bones from the Jurassic period. So na-determine nila sa Jurassic period is because nagagamit pud sila og radioactive dating para ma-determine nila kung unsa pud ni nga ages. So next slide please. So these can be mold and cast fossils. Like most of the fossilized dinosaur skeleton and big bones, we see replacement fossils like petrified wood or whole body fossils, mammoths caught in the eyes or insects trapped in the eyes or insect trapped in and amber. So from the world itself, mold is naka-imprint na mga animals or plants. So it has 2 types of mold. So next slide please. So as I say earlier, is a mold is an imprint left by the shelf on the rock that surrounded it. So these are the imprint animals nga nahibilin siya sa mga rocks. So next slide please. So it has the 2 types of molds, internal mold and internal mold. Next slide please. Internal mold, it is the mold of the outside of the shell. Each time we break a shell or bone cut of the rock, an internal mold is left behind. So it means the entire example kanang shell, the entire mold is left behind. Of course, ang shell, di ba, pag once nadikit na siya, na kanang mugahi na siya sa rock, so once na imong hawaon ang kanang shell, so ang mabilin jud dira ang iyahang draw nga sa gawa sa shell ba. So that is what we call external mold, outside nga naka-impinge outside of the shell. So next slide please. Next is the internal mold. Molds of the outside underside of the shell may be left on the surface of rock that form when sand or mud filled with the rock or inside of the shell. So, naka-imprint na siya inside of the shell. It means the object of the shell. Katong sulod ni jud ba nga makita nimo nga that is the object. Unlike sa external kay outside na siya, and internal is of course sa sulod na siya. Na these are the examples of the internal mold as we can see, and understandable po siya. Next slide please. Okay, Jonathan will continue the types of fossils. Dan?
I'm sorry. The second type of fossils now is the molecular fossils. So they refer to as biomarkers or biosynthesis that are incorporated into the sediment and eventually to become a rock. So as you can see, these pictures is matagal na ito siya naging bato, no. Dati is yung buhay pa siya is they have little or they have microorganism, no, mga maliliit na organismo or something, pwede po siya ma-relate as a plant or something na mayroong buhay noon dati in a past living. So as you can see, this example is a corals, and this is the corals. Then the next pictures is they have same thing, no, corals then. So they are molecular, no, then eventually they evolved or they have passed by in the million years ago, so they become a rock, solid rock. Next. Many of these chemicals become older known ways and can be stable to billion of years. So as you can see now, they have some million of years ago. So nagiging decay and decompose na po siya. So yan po ang nangyayari sa molecular fossils. Next slide. Trace fossils. So are mark left behind. So animals or plants that have made an impression. So as you can see, this is the very important fossils na dinidiscover ng geology. Dahil dito po sa trace fossil, na-discover po kung ano ang buhay ng mga sinaunang hayop or anong klaseng halaman nila tumutubo sa unang panahon because of trace fossils. No? Natutukoy nila kung saan direction at kung paano nabubuhay ang isang uri ng hayop. Next slide please. Then these fossils include nest, burrow, footprint, or any other markings of animals. So hindi bukod sa bakas or sa pamumuuri ng isang halaman, matitrace din nila kung paano at anong klase ng saan galing, or like ito sa first picture is you can see the kanang pugad ng isang ibon. So as you can see the model of the pugad ng isang ibon. So, and then the second picture is they have traced by put isang imprint, no, ng put ng dinosaur or something, mga wild animals na malalaki pa kaysa mga hayop noon dati. So next picture please. Then the structures of the minerals that replace that form can be busy. So sometimes they are made into art and jewelry. So hindi lang po imprint ng mga hayop o halaman, kundi maging ang trace fossils po ay importante yung mga kagamitan ng mga sinaunang panahon. As you can see, the first picture is the jewelry. No? Example po yan ng jewelry na kung saan ang mga palamuti ay gamit po ng mga mababangis ng ngipin ng mga sinaunang hayop. Then the second pictures po is the art, no? That came from the Egyptian people or the Egypt civilization. So as you can see, the jar that we have full of art. So one of the spotted geologists' art is the country of Egypt. So marami pong kasaysayan ang Egypt na nakabaon. So patuloy pong hinuhukay ng geologists para ma-discover po ang iba't ibang mga pamumuhay ng mga sinaunang Egyptian people. Yun po ang trace fossils. Next slide, please. Next is carbon fossils. So, ikaapat is ang carbon fossils. So, all living things contain an element carbon, no? So, sa ngalan nga nabubuhay ka gamit ang enerhiya ng araw, nag-absorb ka ng energy from the sun. So, you are considered all living things. So, tao or hayop, they have contained carbon. So, when an organism dies and it buried into sediment, kapag daw isang organismo ay namatay at nabaon sa isang lupa, so they have contained carbon. So as you can see the pictures there, no? They have a bee. So ang carbon ay murag ka na magpabilin siya dira as imong lawas hangtod sa mga dayko. So the one reason no they have na makikita pa natin ang mga fossils is the carbon that you contain in your body. Next slide, please. The thin layer of carbon left behind can show an organism delicate part like leaves or plants. Fern fossil 300 years ago. The fern is fossils of plant. No, it's a kind of plant. So fern. So as you can see there, they have carbon also. So syempre once they carbonated fossils. So nagiging naiiwan ang carbon kapag tayo nagdi-decay. Next slide. The pseudofossils, no? Pseudofossils sometimes rarely solutions of various minerals spread through the sediment. So, pseudofossils po ay maaari itong kumakapit na sa sediment kasi marami na mga fossils ang naaagnas na so they can na naiiwan at nagiging isang particles na lang ng mga fossil or mga sedimentary rock. So, it takes the shape of some plants, part, or animals. So, meron po siyang nakukuha na parte ng hayop o parte po ng halaman. Next slide, please. Their studies shown they are neither plants nor inorganic object. Markings or impressions that may be mistaken for fossils. It may be misleading as some types of minerals the fossils can mimic lives formed by the forming what appear to be highly detailed or organized structures. The pseudofossils is fossils that manganese oxide in the form of dendrite. Then this look like the moss or plant fossils. So they are they are considered pwede po siya may mong plants, then they pwede po siya ma-considered as animals. So they have identifying pa siya no na what kind of post na pa siya man. So they are continually mixtures, so they have decayed to become minerals no sa earth surface. So may mo siyang particles dito sa sedimentary. So that's all the 5 types of fossils.